No one noticed the janitor. That's how Robert Bob Hayes liked it. He swept the gleaming linoleum floors of the Jefferson Naval Research Center each day, blending into the background like an old piece of office furniture. At 63, with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to look right through you, Bob was just another blue jumpsuit moving his mop along silent corridors. But there was a day, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, when everything changed. That morning, a group of fresh-faced Navy SEALs were being given the grand tour of the secure wing. They swaggered down the hallway, voices echoing off the tile, trading stories of desert firefights and bar brawls in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. Bob was there, as usual, pushing his squeaky mop bucket. He didn't glance up. He'd perfected the art of invisibility. But one young SEAL, a 24-year-old named Kyle Bishop, suddenly froze mid-step. He wasn't staring at Bob's lined face or the battered mop. He was staring at Bob's forearm. When Bob reached forward to wring out the mop, his sleeve had inched up, revealing a faded tattoo in black script. To most people, it would look like any other military tattoo, but Kyle knew better. It read, Ambabadudi Brevi, Kanen Unit, Tora Bora, 2003. Kyle's father had been Navy, his uncle a Special Forces man, and his older brother served with Marine Recon before an IED ended his career early. Kyle knew exactly what that tattoo meant. Tora Bora in 2003 wasn't just another operation. It was the kind of whispered legend that older warriors spoke of only after a few drinks, then swore you to silence, barely above a whisper. Kyle said, "Sir." Bob finally lifted his gaze, and for the first time in years, locked eyes with someone who saw him. A silent understanding passed between them. An instant connection only two warriors could share. The young SEAL's buddies kept walking, oblivious, swapping jokes about poker games in Qatar. But Kyle stood there, staring like he'd seen a ghost. And in a way, he had been, because Bob Hayes wasn't just some janitor. He was Master Chief Robert Hayes, a man presumed dead after a mission buried under so much classified ink it might as well have never existed. But here he was, alive and pushing a mop down a quiet hallway, hiding secrets that could shake entire rooms of men in suits and brass. And on that ordinary Tuesday, the past finally threatened to crash into the present. And Bob Hayes knew the life he'd hidden for decades might be about to come roaring back for 2 solid years. Bob Hayes had existed like a ghost, fading into the backdrop of the Jefferson Naval Research Facility. But the moment young Navy SEAL Kyle Bishop whispered, "Sir," in that quiet corridor, the invisible man was invisible no longer. In the split second, their eyes met. Something ancient and unspoken passed between them. It wasn't rank or uniform that connected them. It was the knowledge of violence survived, secrets carried, and lives forever changed. And though Bob quickly looked away, Kyle couldn't unsee what he'd just witnessed. A tattoo on Bob's forearm, reading MWD Bravo K9 Unit, Tora Bora 2003. To any outsider, it might have been just another military tattoo, faded with age and salt. But Kyle came from a military family that knew how to read between the lines. Tora Bora was a name spoken in hushed tones. MWD Bravo was rumored to be a unit so clandestine it never existed on paper operators who hunted terrorists deep in mountains. No map dared record. By that evening, the corridors of Jefferson were humming with whispers. Kyle had texted his old bud's instructor, Master Chief Harold Jennings, who'd once told him legends about a handler named Bob Hayes, a man who supposedly died in a cave collapse in Afghanistan, leaving behind a trail of classified wreckage and a story sealed tighter than Fort Knox. Jennings called back fast. "Kyle, are you damn sure what you saw?" "I'm sure, Master Chief." It was him. The tattoo. The eyes. "He's alive." Jennings fell silent, then finally muttered, "Son, if that's true, then someone at the Pentagon is about to have the worst day of their life." Word traveled at lightning speed. Calls flew between the Pentagon, Langley, and bases whose locations didn't exist on any official map. Because if Bob Hayes was alive when he was supposed to be buried beneath an Afghan mountain, it meant the government had either hidden him for 2 decades or that the biggest cover-up since Watergate was about to implode. Within 48 hours, a young intelligence officer was dispatched to Jefferson under strict orders. Find out who the hell your janitor really is. He located Bob Hayes in a supply closet, calmly counting mop heads. The officer cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice casual. "Sir, we'd just like to verify some details in your file." Bob paused, stared the officer straight in the face, and said, "I already gave you everything 20 years ago." And with those 9 words, the truth detonated like a grenade in the chain of command. Because Bob Hayes, the ghost of Tora Bora, wasn't just alive, he'd been hiding in plain sight the whole time. Robert Bob Hayes stared at Colonel Richard Cole across the small conference room, the hum of the overhead lights louder than either man's breathing. Just hours before, Bob had been mopping these very floors in his navy blue custodian uniform, dismissed by almost everyone as an invisible man pushing a mop bucket. But now, there was no hiding, because Bob Hayes was no ordinary janitor. Colonel Cole kept glancing at the file on the table, as if the truth it contained might leap out and bite him. Bob clenched his jaw, knowing that file held the ghosts of his past, a past he'd buried deeper than the dust bunnies in the base's corridors. He took a breath and finally spoke. 22 years ago, I wasn't Robert Hayes. I was Ghost 6, Master Chief in a covert K-9 unit operating in Afghanistan. We were hunting high-value targets in the Tora Bora Mountains. Colonel Cole stiffened. Tora Bora. That's where, Bob nodded, cutting him off. Where we found more than terrorists. My unit stumbled onto encrypted files and documents that exposed American contractors selling classified military intel. Billions of dollars funneled through shell corporations and Swiss banks. It was treason at the highest levels. He could see the shock in Cole's eyes, the same disbelief Bob had once felt. I tried to report it, Bob continued, but my chain of command shut me out. Friends I'd trusted turned away. I got injured in an ambush not long after. Nearly lost my life and my leg. I was still recovering when men in suits showed up at the hospital. They offered me a deal to keep my mouth shut, or face charges of insubordination, leaking classified info. Even treason. They'd manufactured enough evidence to bury me for life. The memory of those days felt like shrapnel still lodged in his chest. Bob's voice dropped. I chose silence, disappeared, changed my name, became a janitor, because it kept me hidden and close to the people who serve this country. But every day, kept watching, awaiting, because I knew the truth would come back someday. Colonel Cole leaned forward, his voice trembling with quiet anger. Bob, you should have told someone. You should have come to me. Bob let out a bitter laugh. I did try. Nobody wanted to listen, and the few who did ended up dead. The weight of his words hung in the room. For the first time in years, Bob felt the chains of secrecy loosen just a little. He'd finally said it out loud. He wasn't just a janitor in dusty hallways. He was the man who'd uncovered betrayal at the highest levels and paid the price with his entire life. Colonel Cole closed the file, his expression solemn. Well, Bob, this time, you're not alone. The first time, Colonel Richard Cole realized just how deep the rabbit hole went was the moment he stared at Bob Hayes across a steel conference table. Documents spread between them, like the pieces of a shattered mirror. Bob, the quiet janitor who'd mopped those hallways for years, without a word, sat there with the posture of a man who'd once commanded missions in places no map would ever name. Cole couldn't shake the feeling that the fate of more than one career, and maybe a whole lot more, rested on what happened next. Once Bob finished telling his story, the hidden conspiracy, the buried truth about American contractors selling secrets for Swiss bank accounts, an electric silence filled the room. Cole's training screamed at him to bury the whole thing, to send Bob back into the shadows and pretend none of it existed. But another part of him, the part that wore the uniform for the right reasons, knew he couldn't let it go. So he made calls, quiet calls, the kind that didn't show up on official logs. By the end of the week, Bob's revelations had reached a handful of trusted figures in the Pentagon, and the Department of Justice, people Cole knew wouldn't sell out their country for a payday. When the evidence Bob provided was verified, the mood shifted from disbelief to grim determination. The conspiracy was real and far from over. Some of the same powerful men who'd forced Bob into hiding were still out there, entrenched in positions where they could do even more harm. One cold morning, Cole found Bob in the supply closet, restocking paper towels as though he hadn't just changed the course of national security. Cole closed the door behind him. "They're launching an investigation," Cole said quietly. "A real one this time, and they want you to help." Bob didn't look up. "I'm a janitor. Colonel Lee." "No, you're Go 6. And right now, America needs Go 6." For a long moment, Bob was silent, hands still moving with automatic precision. Then he set the towels aside, his eyes carrying that haunted look of a man who's lost brothers on distant soil. "If I do this," he said, voice low, "it puts a target on everyone left who ever mattered to me." Cole stepped closer. "They already have you in their sights, Buck. The difference is whether you're running or fighting." Bob sighed. "Then I guess I'm fighting." By nightfall, Bob Hayes, Master Chief Go 6, was no longer just a name on a dusty personnel file. He was back in the game, and the ghosts of his past were about to find out that the man they tried to bury was still very much alive. The first bullet cracked through the air like lightning, splintering the concrete pillar inches from Bob Hayes' shoulder. He didn't flinch. Instead, he grabbed Richard Cole by the arm and yanked him behind cover, his voice low and lethal. "Stay low. Follow my lead." Moments earlier, Bob and Cole had arrived at the abandoned shipping yard on the outskirts of Baltimore, following intel from the newly opened investigation. The plan was simple: intercept a covert meeting between corrupt officials and foreign operatives tied to the conspiracy Bob had exposed. But the second they stepped out of Cole's forward expedition, muzzle flashes had erupted from the shadows. Bob, who only days ago had been sweeping hallways, now moved like a panther. He scanned the maze of rusted containers, noting every angle, every glint of metal that might signal another gunman. Cole struggled to keep up, adrenaline pounding in his ears. "Who the hell are these guys?" Cole gasped. Bob's eyes stayed locked ahead. "Contract killers. Same crew that tried to silence me years ago. And if they're here, it means someone high up knows we're digging too deep." Another barrage of gunfire rang out. Bullets sparked off steel. Bob fired back, expertly placing 3 rounds that dropped 2 assailants in the open. Cole stared, barely processing what he'd just seen. "Jesus, Bob. You're not just some janitor." "No." "Sir?" Bob said flatly. "Reloading never was." A brief lull fell over the yard. Cole finally took in the man beside him, not just a retired Navy Master Chief, but a lethal instrument the government had created, then cast aside. Now, Go 6 was back in action. Bob checked his watch, voice cold. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before reinforcements roll in. We need evidence, or this all goes away." He motioned toward a shipping container marked only with a coded serial number. Inside, Bob suspected, were documents and digital drives that could bring down the men at the heart of the conspiracy. Together, they sprinted across the yard. Bob kicked open the lock. Inside were boxes stacked ceiling-high folders, hard drives, sealed evidence. The magnitude of what they'd stumbled onto left Cole speechless. Bob lifted one of the drives, eyes narrowing. "This is it. Names, wire transfers, Black Ops orders. Enough to bring them all down." But before they could exhale, headlights swept across the yard. A fleet of SUVs roared in, tires screeching. Armed men poured out, weapons drawn. Bob set his jaw. "Get ready, Colonel. This is where we make our stand." And as gunfire ripped through the night once more, Richard Cole realized that the man America thought was invisible was about to save it all over again. The sky above the shipping yard glowed red with the flicker of gunfire. Shell casings littered the concrete like fallen leaves as Bob Hayes fired the last round from his Glock, dropping another gunman who'd tried to flank them. Beside him, Richard Cole was gasping for breath, his dress shirt soaked with sweat. "Bob, we can't hold them forever. There's too many." Bob, eyes sharp, ignored the sting of a graze across his upper arm. He slammed a fresh magazine into his weapon. "We're not leaving without that evidence. You want these bastards exposed or not?" Cole swallowed hard, torn between the weight of duty and the primal fear clawing at his chest. Moments earlier, Bob had cracked open that shipping container and unearthed damning proof documents listing powerful names in Washington and foreign accounts stuffed with dirty money. It was the kind of scandal that could bring the government to its knees. But now, a private army was storming the yacht to make sure that truth stayed buried. Suddenly, a black SUV screeched up, fishtailing to a stop. Doors flew open, and a dozen men in tactical gear spilled out, unleashing a hail of bullets. Sparks exploded off metal crates, the noise deafening. Bob yanked Cole behind a forklift, shoving the drive full of evidence into his friend's hands. If I don't make it out, you get this to the FBI. You hear me? Colonel, you run off. Bob would outrun, but Cole stood frozen, realizations slamming into him. Bob wasn't just fighting for revenge or for secrets. He was fighting for every American who'd been lied to. And suddenly, Cole couldn't abandon him. He lifted his own pistol, face hardening. I'm not leaving you behind. Chief, Bob flashed the faintest of smiles, his silent respect passing between the two men. And then he rose, firing shot after shot with brutal precision. The attackers fell one after another, but the odds were overwhelming. In the chaos, Cole spotted one man creeping toward Bob's blind spots. Rifle raised. Without thinking, Cole fired and the gunman dropped instantly. Bob turned, eyes widening for a split second. Good shooting. Colonel. Explosions boomed as crates ignited, flames leaping into the night sky. Bob grabbed Cole's arm. We've got to move. This whole place is going up. Together. They ducked and weaved through the labyrinth of containers, chased by fire and bullets. Bob knew they were running out of time, and that the men trying to kill them weren't just hired thugs. They were connected to something far deeper and far darker than anyone in America wanted to believe. And as they disappeared into the shadows, Richard Cole finally understood. The truth was worth any price, even their lives. In the end, the deepest wounds often come not from the battles we fight, but from the truths we bury. Silence may feel safe, but it only feeds the darkness. Speaking up, even when it costs us, is the first step toward healing and justice. May we all have the courage to bring secrets into the light, because only in truth can we find real peace and leave behind a world worthy of the generations to come.